You mentioned to achieve operational effectiveness. In layman's terms, would it be fair to say that includes basically to catch more and convict more money launderers or tax evaders, criminals?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
When you say that the government has done some international comparisons, does the department have any international comparisons on the operational effectiveness of the regimes? For example, in previous appearance, we had some information that showed, in 1 year, 4 convictions under the act were achieved. In the next year, there was, maybe 12. Do we know how that compares, the operational effectiveness compares to our peer jurisdictions?
I think I would say, so we do have, and we released in March 2023, some metrics around sort of the operational effectiveness of the regime. And it did show that in sort of a 10-year time span, sort of the effectiveness of and our ability to prosecute financial crimes has steadily declined and is, we would say, not aligned with the risk profile of money laundering in Canada. In terms of what's been done internationally, I might turn to Erin, who can speak maybe to that more specifically.
Excellent. No, and that's an excellent question. What I would add is Canada is a member of the Financial Action Task Force, which is an international money laundering standard setter, but also the body that undertakes peer reviews of all of the countries around the world and how they're meeting their money laundering and terrorist financing standards. And Canada those reviews show that Canada has a strong money laundering framework, but our operational effectiveness is lower and could be improved. And in comparison to other countries, for example, in the G7, Canada is among the lower of our peers in the G7 in terms of how effective our regime is in combating money laundering and terrorist financing. And one of the areas where Canada's regime is a little bit different than some of those countries that have high effectiveness in terms of their enforcement is those countries often have a dedicated police force focused on combating financial crimes in this space.
Thank you very much. So just Cole's Notes version, decent regime, but metrics and outcomes, we don't catch and convict. It's actually quite difficult. When we compare ourselves, we would appreciate direction to the March release if that's possible. A couple other questions because I'm going to run out of time, and feel free to follow up with information. But you said you referenced British Columbia's Cullen Commission saying 5%, potentially 5% of increase in house price appreciation related to money laundering. Has the department looked at a similar analysis for the rest of the country on the impact of money laundering on the housing market specifically?
I don't have that data with me. We can take that back, though.
Sure. So if there is anything on that, I'd be very interested in hearing about it. You talked about private-to-private information sharing. Bill C-27, the Privacy Act, is being reviewed now. The financial services sector, for many years, has asked for the ability to share information with peers in cases of suspected money laundering. Today, they can already do that in fraud. I'm telling you all these things you already know. Did the Department of Finance make any recommendations to the government on expanding that safe harbor provision, if you will, in Bill C-27?
I would say on that question, that's an area of active sort of discussion at the moment. We've had discussions with our ISED colleagues, with the Canadian Bankers Association. We recognize the importance of moving that forward, and so that it's under consideration.
Right. Yeah. But there's currently no provision.
No provision at the moment that provides sort of the safe harbor that financial institutions are seeking.
You mentioned reporting entities. One of the big differences between Canada and the U.S., land title companies in the U.S. are reporting an equivalent reporting entity. Land title companies are not going to pay an insurance claim to somebody that they don't know. If we're trying to find out who individuals are, I'd recommend that we consider adding land title companies to a reporting entity list. I'm not on their good books now. I'm off their Christmas card list. But I would strongly recommend we look at that. It appears that you had some summary of the consultation that you released in June. To the extent that that information, if there is a summary that the department's provided, say to the minister or to the government, that would serve our interests very well if we could have the summary of the consultation responses you received. I think that would help direct us in our inquiry. I note the last Parliament spent 14 hearings on this matter. I'd love to spend 25, but we might have something a little less than that. But if you could provide that information, that may help us focus our efforts and where we would go. And maybe finally, well, 10 seconds left, we'll come back to it, but I'd like to hear from you before we leave here today about where you would recommend we focus some efforts of things that have not yet been probed sufficiently. So I appreciate your appearance here today. You started off by saying how many agencies are involved that touch money laundering, or a portion of it. I'm wondering who goes to bed at night and wakes up every morning and the only thing they think about is money laundering in the federal government. Like who is the owner?
So I'd say, so finance has overall lead for the Proceeds of Crime, Money Laundering, and Terrorist Financing Act. That being said, I mean, we don't have sort of a line of sight in terms of the criminals and what they're doing. That would certainly be sort of the police services and our intelligence partners. So they live the criminality aspect more of it, but we live the policy side. You know.
And just for my own clarification, you're the Assistant Deputy Minister of Financial Sector Policy. So
yep.
In addition to money laundering activities, like you have very wide, you're doing open banking, you're doing the widely held rule, you're doing OSFI, right? Okay. Who goes around to the other departments and knocks on the door and says, hey, there's an issue with money laundering? Like, is there a who does that? Would you say finance is the, okay.
It does have the lead, and we have, an internal governance structure, which is probably bureaucratic in nature, but both at the DGs, ADM, DM level, there are regular touch points on specifically on AML.
Perfect. Do you know what a net worth assessment is by CRA? The number of net worth assessments completed by CRA has dropped over 54% since about, certainly within the last 5 or 6 years. They used to do about 1,400 net worth assessments, and now they do, just up until in 2023, up until December, they were only at 400 and something. Have we spoken to our friends at the CRA to say what's happening there?
I can't speak to the issue of net worth assessments specifically, but the CRA is part of the group of entities and agencies in which that we discuss sort of the issues around money laundering.
They also receive actionable intelligence from FinTrack, I believe. The number of net worth assessments that have been completed based off of actionable intelligence has also dropped proportionally the same. I suspect the number of actionable intelligence reports sent to the CRA hasn't dropped, but I would be very interested to know how many actionable intelligence reports had been sent to CRA over the same time period. So currently we have the number of net worth assessments that have been completed, which show a significant drop. But I'd be very interested to know if you could help us about, is it that the actionable intelligence has dropped, or are they reshuffling resources within CRA? I have a suspicion about what the answer is, but if we have data to support that, I think that would be very, very helpful.
We can certainly take back the question in terms of
Thank you very much.
Disclosures.
In terms of catching and convicting, in the United States, it's illegal to lie to the police. They have a RICO statute and laws. wire fraud is like 20 years in jail for wire fraud. In Canada, we don't have the same. Well, you also can be charged with perjury for making a mistaken statutory declaration. As long as the piece of paper says you'll be charged with perjury if you lie on this paper, 15 years in jail. Canada has no similar serious criminal penalties. Do you think that's an area where we should be pushing?
I think that's certainly an area where we'd appreciate sort of the committee's input.
Last question. Last question. Did you hear of Bill C-289?
Yes.
Okay.
Private members bill. Yes.
Be very curious to know what the advice was to the government on moving forward with that bill.
We can take that back again.
Sure.
This
I don't need it now.
Yeah. No, I'll just say, I mean, that was a bill that was more criminal in nature, so the
Yes.
Department of Justice are the one that provided the advice.
Yes.
We can take that back, but to the extent that you will be sort of meeting with the Department of Justice, I encourage you to ask them the question as well.
I look forward to meeting with the Department of Justice. Thank you very much for your time.